It has been a long time since there's been this much action. One sad note in all this, of course, is the absence of one name. Our job is to choose whom we think can be the most effective. It's an interesting and exciting race, and all we have to do is vote. So let's do it, and let's make it a big one. We pray that is so. This is Bob Harrington.
Washington moves fast, policy shift overnight, and yet here in our corner of Vermont, the real impact often comes at the speed of town meetings and Main Street conversations. Politics aren't just about headlines and sound bites. It's about people, communities, and the choices that shape our lives. They say all politics is local, but in a nation this divided, what does that actually mean? We're not here for spin. We're here for clarity, for straight answers, for the kind of talk you'd expect over a cup of coffee at the local diner, not in the halls of Congress. This is Matt Harrington, and this is the Chamber Telecast. Welcome back to the Chamber Telecast, a civic conversation series produced by the Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce with our partners and buddies over at Catamount Access Television. In this age of political volatility and institutional distrust, we're reminded that history doesn't just repeat itself, it rhymes and maybe it even teaches, but only if we're willing to listen. Today's guest is someone who can help us listen a little bit better. I've been a personal fan of this individual for a number of years and have been so impressed by his exhaustive and illuminating bibliography. He has been gracious to visit us in the past, connecting with our young professional group, and I'm thrilled to have him on the telecast today. Garrett Graff is an award-winning journalist, historian, and best-selling author whose work explores the intersection of politics, power, and crisis in America. From The Only Plane in the Sky, his gripping oral history of 9/11, to Watergate, A New History, and his critically acclaimed and Peabody-nominated Long Shadow podcast series. Garrett has been one of the foremost storytellers of American reckoning. A former editor of Politico and Washingtonian magazine, Garrett began his career as one of the earliest political editors of Wired, where he explored the ways technology, policy, and national security increasingly intertwined. He has written for publications including The Atlantic, Esquire, New York Times, CNN, offering sharp, historical, grounded commentary on everything from cybersecurity to presidential leadership. He's appeared on Meet the Press, PBS NewsHour, NPR, and 60 Minutes, and has briefed audiences from the Pentagon to public libraries on the resilience and fragility of American democracy. Through it all, Garrett remains committed to one guiding idea: that understanding history is not a luxury, it's a civic responsibility. As we grapple with yet another era of political rupture, fueled by conspiracy, polarization, and fear-mongering, Garrett joins us to unpack what we've got here, what history tells us, and hopefully, and maybe, how we might be able to find our way back. Garrett, welcome.
Thank you so much. That was such a generous and kind introduction.
Well, as I said before, we went live, and I said it even here, a big fan of yours, have been for a long time. We're going to get into it. Like I said, we're going to nerd out a little bit, but I'm hoping our audience will just understand kind of the magnitude of the moment, but also the magnitude of your work and your experience. Really, you're an authority on a lot of this stuff. And so we do want to talk to you and kind of through the Bennington community, through the regional community, even throughout Vermont. Hopefully we gain some clarity from your insights. So thank you again for joining us. So the number one question, as I've been asking, telling people that you're going to be on the show, is of course, what did you have for breakfast this morning? And what do you think it says about you?
We have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so breakfast is a big part of the morning routine in our house. And this morning, actually, I had a cinnamon roll from Mangie's Bakery in Montpelier, which I picked up over the weekend because my parents live in Montpelier, which is where I grew up. So I guess what I had for breakfast tells you I am a native and born and raised in Montpelier.
Well, and that you have kids because,
Exactly.
Self-respecting grown adult would just have cinnamon buns on a random weekday, but maybe. So that's good to know, and appreciate you giving a little shout out there to some local businesses. Okay, let's hop into kind of the questions we really want to get to. Your body of work spans from everything, as we mentioned, to 9/11, to Watergate, Cold War bunkers, to the Manhattan Project, which is going to come out soon. I'm always fascinated by the why behind the what. And as you and I were talking before we went live, I'm just fascinated by how, Garrett, do you decide the moment in history you want to tackle next? Is it something that emerges through current events? Is it a gap in our collective memory as American citizens, or something else entirely? Walk us through your creative and research project.
Yeah, I think the answer is it's a little bit all of the above. There are a couple of things that generally drive my interest and the way that I think about and conceive projects. One is I'm obviously very interested in turning points, sort of epochal moments or cultural changes or technological developments that alter everything afterward. This month I have my third volume of book-length oral history coming out. It's about the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb. And, the first two that I did were 9/11 and D-Day, trying to tell those days in the voices of the people who lived them, pulling together hundreds of first-person accounts. And so, those three books for me sort of sit together as, the most important single day of the 21st century, the most important single day of the 20th century, and then with the atom bomb, the most important world-changing moment or invention of the 20th century. And I'm also very interested, I do a lot of what I call near history. Basically all of my work as a historian is living memory or right at the edge of living memory. And so a lot of my work is looking back on events at, the 10-year mark, the 25-year mark, the 50-year mark, that what I try to do is pull together all of the knowledge that we have gained in the time since the event actually happened to tell the story anew. And you may be listening to this and say, like, yeah, duh, that's the whole point of history. But to me, there's sort of a specific part of that I try to do, which is, my training is as a journalist, as a magazine writer, as a daily newspaper writer. And so, in some ways, I know really well how little we understand of events as they are actually happening around us. And so, my goal with the near history that I try to do is to go back to events that we sort of think we understand, but be able to reconceptualize them and reframe them using all of the knowledge that we have accumulated since to sort of show us that we actually don't understand these moments as they went by and as we remember them.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit just the writing process. Are you an everyday writer? Are you a wake up in the morning? Is it early morning for you? Is it, sometimes we have these night owl writers that start writing at 10 o'clock at night, and I can't understand that. But what's your style there?
No, I am definitely an early morning writer. One of the things that I have really learned, this book out in August is my 10th. I've published sort of somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 million published words at this point in books, and have really come to understand that there are some days that you write and some days that you don't, and that for me, I would tell you I'm an everyday writer, but what that sort of really means is if I sit down and get a good writing session in, 3 days a week, maybe 4 days a week, that's actually, pretty successful for me. As we discussed, I've got young kids, and so don't write a lot on the weekends anymore. And then when I'm in the final push of a book, I'll work evenings as well. But for me, on a day when I'm writing and feel good about the writing that I'm doing, I've written everything that I can by about lunchtime.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. So reflect on this. We've talked about the 9/11, Watergate. I think the first book I picked up of yours was Raven Rock, which was just fascinating. What is your sense of this moment in time right now in 2025? Are we going to have to now start to crunch these century moments into, now we're going to need some micro century moments, because we've already had the 9/11 and we've already had the riots. So talk to me about this moment. What's your sense as a historian, as a journalist, kind of the maturation of both of those?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because one of my jokes about living through particularly this last decade is just how much gets crammed into a given day, a given week, a given month in terms of news and world-changing events, that we are so used to in the history field, people making these broad statements of, I study, the Middle Ages in Great Britain, or I study, 18th century France, or, I'm a student of 19th century American politics or something like that. And I think, when we get further away from this moment, you're going to see PhD candidates who are like, yeah, sort of my PhD work starts on the evening of January 5th, 2021, and goes through about noon of January 7th. Or, I specialize in the first week in March of 2020. And that, there's just so much crammed into some of these moments that, August a year ago, I think, is sort of another one of these moments, or, July of last summer, and all that gets crammed in. I think one of the things that really stands out for me, as both a historian and someone who, as a journalist, still writes a lot about day-to-day news coverage in this moment in America, is that we are far outside the bounds of the American experience right now. And what worries me is, I think we are living in a moment where we think that the past can guide us toward the future that our country is on track for. And I think the reality is we are outside the bounds of the country that we have known, and the political traditions that we have known, and the economic traditions that we have known. And that's not, we're sort of in that moment of, the disclaimer at your bank or investing firm of, past experience is not indicative of future results. And what I worry about is a complacency in America that, like, tomorrow is going to be more similar to yesterday than it is going to be different. And I don't actually think that that's necessarily true right now.
Yeah, my layman's term of that is, and I agree with you, Garrett. It's been a whiny moment. it's like, I often, and I'm just kind of, I love to be an observer of history and an observer of just kind of people. And you kind of go, like in this moment, and I don't want to throw it all on the millennials and the Gen Z. Um, but like it's a moment that like what was going right before the Civil War, and I'm sure there were people like, I really don't want to do this, I really like, or you think about before the American Revolution, and you watch that, right, you watch that through history where there's a lot of people that are reluctant to get into these wars, and you have to now think kind of at a granular level. Man, I bet there are a lot of patriots right before they became a patriot, they were like, I really don't want to do this, I just want to go back to farming, and if I just don't listen and I pay the taxes, we're good to go. And so I do think we're at this inflection point where we're not going to be yesteryear, yesterday, and it is going to be, we're going to have to pull up our big girl and boy kind of pants and kind of do something different if we want something different. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you saying that. Your podcast, Long Shadow, season 4 now coming out kind of in real time. We've started listening to that, my wife and I. I really appreciated season 2. We were on a long trip, I think down to Maryland, and we just hit play on season 2 and listened all the way through. Just very fascinating, and I think you have a really great way, especially on the podcast, as you've mentioned, kind of putting these moments into place of everything from the Oklahoma City bombing and how does that connect all the way up to kind of the MAGA movement, and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, we loved the podcast so much, we went back to season 1 on the drive home, which was your oral history of 9/11, live, audio tape from that day, audio tape from the airplane, voicemails, and cried our eyes out all the way home. So thank you for that, Garrett. But an amazing, honestly, one of my favorite podcasts. I was so excited when you launched season 4. We're right in the middle of that now. In season 2, and this just so to create context for everybody, it's called The Rise of the American Far Right. And again, as an observer of history and observation, and just people, I've been looking for these types of things. I think Ezra Klein just did a good episode on it as well. But you did a great kind of multi-part series on the rise of the American far right. But given the resurgence of Trump in 2025, what are the through lines between, so kind of walk us through that if you can in a micro dose of Oklahoma City to the Capitol riots to today? How do you connect that thread?
Yeah, so what we try to do with Long Shadow is, we do one season a year, and it's deeply reported and narrative driven. It's not a sort of conversation interview show like a lot of podcasts. And what we try to do is pick a subject in American life and go back and try to explain why things are the way that they are in America. And across the most recent seasons, for instance, season 2 there, you mentioned the rise of the American far right. Last year, for season 3, we did gun violence and gun policy in America. And this 4th season looks at really the rise and fall of the internet and social media. Sort of how did this tool that started with so much promise and hope and change for transparency and accountability, this sort of promise of bringing us all together online, turn into such a polarizing tool that has sort of driven us apart as a country and a society. So the rise of the American far right, we tried to trace basically 40 or 50 years about the rise of a far-right ideology in the United States, from the 1980s up through the showdown standoff in Waco, Texas, the Oklahoma City bombing, the Ammon Bundy's showdowns in Nevada and Oregon during the Obama presidency, up through Charlottesville and January 6th. And what we tried to do, and what we really try to do across all 3 of these seasons, is help people connect dots across history show that sort of the reason America is the way that it is today is due to a lot more deliberate choice than most people understand. That the rise of Donald Trump, Donald Trump is at some point sui generis as a figure in American politics, but at the same time, he has always been a symptom and not the disease in American politics. That he is and always has been someone who has tapped into an existing seam of far-right ideology, white nationalist, white supremacist ideology and backing about sort of what America is and what it should be. And so I think, our real goal with that second season, which, as you said, came out actually in a moment when Trump was out of office and sort of Trump's story was still unknown, or the ending of Trump's story was still unknown. I think was, to me, a warning for listeners that, again, Donald Trump may go away, but this ideology isn't. And I think one thing that we understand much more clearly now as a country is that battling this ideology is not something that is only about Donald Trump. That battling the far-right ideology, fighting over this vision of what America is and should be, fighting to preserve our democracy is going to be the defining political conflict, probably of my entire adult life at this point. The next 30, 40 years of American politics is still going to be a fight over this.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you find, Garrett, that, you have such a great way to view that. And I think I fall in line, and probably through some of your influence, but just watching again, the idea that Trump, again, as you said, is really a symptom of a larger issue in America. And I'm sure, I have to imagine, you pull your hair out sometimes with just the easy sucker punches we try to either go after Trump, or that's the problem, or whatever. And as you kind of mentioned, I'm banging the pot on, like, hey, we got deeper rooted issues here than I think we're giving good precedence for, or good spotlight on.
Yeah.
Look, we get this a lot, and it might have faded over time, because I think he's so outrageous now that maybe he's not as compared to Nixon as he was in the first term. But you wrote the book on Nixon, right? Watergate. Where do you find there are similarities between Nixon and Trump, and where do you find that it's just completely different?
Yeah. So my book on Watergate, which came out, I think, in 2021, thereauts, grew out of the first Trump presidency. I had been covering, as you mentioned a little bit in your intro, I had been covering the Trump presidency and the Russian attack on the 2016 election and the Mueller investigation for Wired magazine, and it made me interested in going back and writing and looking at the last moment we had a system confront a criminal and corrupt president, and sort of how our system of government handled that moment. And I think that there are some important differences and similarities between Nixon and Trump. To me, the most important, and the one that I sort of talk most about when I'm talking about the book, is the difference in the political and information system around the presidency. That what, to me, Watergate is actually this incredible story of the American system working. It is this story of the intertwined, delicate ballet of the checks and balances in our constitutional system. Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, and how all of that system had to do their part in order to bring Richard Nixon to justice in the wake of Watergate. And that what you saw particularly in that was the role that during the Nixon presidency, Republicans played in that system. That, in the House and the Senate, that Republican members of Congress and Republican senators understood that their top duty is to their constitutional oath, and that they, as members of the legislative branch, members of a co-equal branch of government to the executive and the presidency, had a role to play in holding the abuses of power of the executive to account. And that they acted first and foremost throughout Watergate as members of the legislative branch first and Republicans second. And that of course, is not what we have seen in either Trump 1 or Trump 2, where the way that Donald Trump has held on to power is with the help of a lot of members of Congress on the Republican side who don't care about his abuses of power and specifically his rejection of the prerogatives of the legislative branch. And I think that that's one of the things that I've written about this spring is, you've seen a lot of news headlines about this idea that, we're in a constitutional crisis over this thing or that thing or that thing. And I think what we're actually experiencing as a country right now is something that is much more grave than that, which is that we are living through what I've called, in my writing, a constitutional crash, which is our Constitution is just sort of dead, that it is not the living document that it's supposed to be, where, our founders never imagined a system where the presidency would ignore Congress, and that Congress just wouldn't care, or that the presidency might ignore the courts and the courts don't care, or at least the Supreme Court doesn't care. 6 justices of the Supreme Court specifically don't care. And that, to me, this is like the real danger in this moment, which is Watergate showed how the system is supposed to work. And we are now living through a system that is just not working because the people who are involved in the system have made a conscious choice to not work.
Yes. So, what keeps you up at night, Garrett, other than your 4-year-old?
So,
it's different. You've answered a lot there, and I'm sure that keeps you up at night. But if there's anything that you go, what, this also, Matt, I think people need to watch out for this too.
Yeah. So I think what keeps me up at night is a combination of sort of 2 of the answers that we've already talked about today, which is the bounds of the future have changed. And we have a president who is acting outside of the bounds of the normal American experience. And what worries me, we've talked a lot about history over the course of this, but a lot of my sort of day-to-day work is on geopolitics and great power politics. And I've written 2 books about American competitiveness and sort of the rise and challenge of China. I've written a book on cyber warfare, and what worries me a lot, particularly when now having just written 2 books on World War II, we are losing the rules-based international order that the greatest generation set up at the end of World War II to ensure that events like World War II never happen again. And we are walking away by our own choice, which to me is the most confounding aspect of this, from partnerships like NATO, from sort of identifiable and predictable global trade systems. We are walking away from all sorts of international alliances that have been the backbone of peace and stability and economic prosperity for the last 80 years. We're picking fights with Canada, which matters a lot to us here in Vermont. We are picking fights with Denmark. We are picking, coercive trade fights with a whole bunch of countries that have been longtime helpful trading partners. And I think what worries me, what keeps me up at night, is looking around at America today. We have lost the living memory of the generation who put that rules-based order in place, who understood how hard it was in World War II to fight against fascism and authoritarianism, to fight against the threat of totalitarianism in the Soviet Union in the Cold War. And that I think we're going to miss the stability of the rules-based international order that the U.S. created in the wake of World War II once it's gone, and that America is very unprepared for a world where we are not the center of the economic and security web for the entire country.
Yeah. If you want to, Garrett, what's your prediction for midterms and 2028? And the caveat, the asterisk there is under a Trump presidency. Not how do you think people are going to win or lose? More, do you think midterms will happen, or they matter? And more importantly, does 2028 even actually happen?
So I think I'm not one of those people who's like, the midterms are going to get canceled. We're never going to have elections again in this country. Because one of the oddities of the countries around the world is sort of even the worst regimes have elections. Vladimir Putin is regularly reelected to the Russian presidency. They just don't happen as free and fair elections in the way that we are used to. And so my fear for the 2026 midterms, for the 2028 presidential, is not that the elections are going to go away. It's that we remain a closely divided country. And so you don't need to do a lot to change the nature of the electorate such that the elections technically happen, but are not the free and fair and ungerrymandered ones that we are used to. I think we see this playing out a little bit right now in Texas, where Texas is trying to do sort of a mid-decade rewriting of the congressional districts to gain a couple of extra Republican seats. We just lived through this moment where Congress passed this huge new $200 billion surge in immigration spending. And when you play these things out, for me, one of the things I worry about, for instance, having covered a lot of federal law enforcement, is we're about to triple the size of ICE immigration agents around the country. What happens in the midterm elections when Donald Trump announces that this new superpowered masked ICE monster is going to help ensure that there are no illegal immigrants voting in the midterm elections, and that in majority minority districts or swing districts around the country, there are going to be ICE officers not posted at the polling place, but, running checkpoints in the neighborhoods on the way to the polling places.
I was going to say they're in SWAT gear right outside of the middle school.
Yeah, or standing on the street outside the middle school. And again, you don't need to do that much in a closely divided country in order to take some of these congressional districts from 51-49 or 52-48 to flip them. And so I think what I worry about in both of these midterms and presidential elections ahead is the way that the Trump administration could put its finger on the scales in some key districts to lock in a effectively authoritarian Republican rule going forward.
Yeah. All right, let's try and switch this up a little bit, Garrett. All right, we scared all our audience at this point. We're 40 minutes in, 45 minutes in. I like to think through a lot of your writing. America survived McCarthyism, Vietnam, Watergate, 9/11, even the January 6th. Give us some hope. What brings you hope today? What's a potential where we even come back from the edge here?
Yeah, so let me give you two specific examples that stand out for me. One is the civic spirit in America is still alive. One of the things that I think really matter in this moment in America is the efforts of organizations like yours that are the sort of moral voices and civic voices of local communities. Because in this moment where we are as a country experiencing such a poisoning of our information environment and loss of trust in key institutions, local still really matters. And that, I think that there is a strong sense in a lot of communities like Vermont that we as a country are still better than the news headlines that our country is experiencing right now. And I think that there's a lot of energy and momentum and willingness to fight in this moment, which is related to the second thing that gives me sort of some hope, which is, America is entering its celebration of its 250th birthday next year. And I think there's going to be a lot of conversation over this next year about what America is and what it isn't. And to me, there's a very simple answer for that. And that's some of the reason that I've done projects like my D-Day book, which is the shortest answer for what you are and what you aren't is what you're willing to fight for. And what I think we are what the conversation that I hope we are going to have as a country, and the answer that I hope that we are going to end up with at the end of that conversation, is that there are enough people left in this country still willing to fight for democracy that's where we end up. I think that there are many different stories we can tell each other about America and its history. James Baldwin argued and believed that, America's story is fundamentally one of a racist country, and that we sort of always have been and always will be. And that's really the beating heart of, the ebbs and flows of American history. I like to believe, and this is a belief, this isn't something that I can prove is true, that America's story is actually a different one, that we are a story of a country that generation to generation strives to be less imperfect, that we are a country that generation by generation strives to live up to the founding creed that all of us are created equal, and that when you look at the arc of American history, it is not a straight line. It is not a steady, unyielding advance, but that generation by generation, for 249 years, the idea of who is American and who is equal has expanded across every generation. And that, my hope, and, the thing that gives me hope for my children's future is that is still America's story today. That we are an imperfect nation, but one that every generation strives to do better.
Thanks, Garrett. As we wrap up, you've done interviews with presidents, whistleblowers, even average Americans. Is there one moment or story, maybe even something personal, that stuck with you as a reminder of what's worth fighting for?
Oh, that's a great question. Boy, I think, I don't know that it's a conversation that I've had, an interview that I have done. But a lot of these oral histories, particularly the World War II ones, are ones that are archival, and so things that I'm reading, and I am continuously struck in reading accounts of American history about the civic spirit of ordinary Americans. And that one of the things that sort of stands out for me across our history is the ability of the plainest Americans to do their best. There is no other system of government or societal hierarchy in the world where George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Dwight Eisenhower are born to the circumstances that they are born to and achieve what they achieve in life, both as individuals and for the world. And, I think what I hope is that we are still a country, and will continue to be a country where our plainest people can still be their best.
Okay. Thank you, Garrett. Garrett, where can they find you? What's a good website? And give us a drop on that new book that's going to come out. I think we're going to air this right around the time that it releases. But where can they find you, and what's the newest book they should go out and grab?
So the newest book is The Devil Reached Toward the Sky, my oral history of the Manhattan Project and the atomic bombings, which brings together the voices of about 500 people, from scientists and physicists and generals to workers on the Manhattan Project in Oak Ridge and Hanford, Washington, to the voices of the bomb survivors in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By the way, one of the things I learned in the course of this project was the role that Vermont marble companies actually played in the Manhattan Project, which I had no understanding of before going into that project. But my writing, you can find my work all on my website, garrettgraff.com, and then I write a newsletter called Doomsday Scenario, which is not quite as depressing as the name might lead you to believe, that is available online at doomsdayscenario.co. And then I am Vermont GMG on all of your social platforms. That's Vermont, and then my initials GMG.
Garrett, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's great to talk to you.
So, audience, here's the takeaway from today. America has never been perfect. We have stumbled, we have fractured, we've lost our way, but we've also repaired, rebuilt, and reimagined what this country could be when people choose hope over cynicism and citizenship over silence. We've seen this before. Presidents tested the rule of law, media turned into echo chambers, movements born from grievance. But we've always seen that quiet courage of whistleblowers and resilience of the free press and the persistence of voters who still believe democracy is worth the mess. And at its best, America is a self-correcting story. And in towns like Bennington, Manchester, and throughout the county, in select board meetings, in classrooms, in the voices of local leaders and concerned neighbors, that story continues. We are not powerless. We are not doomed. We are, as we always have been, unfinished. It was once written that America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. I have no fear that character and generosity of our people will erode, but I am concerned that we don't draw from the deep well of compassion and goodness nearly enough. Together, we can bring back the recognition of our voluntary action, private initiative once enjoyed. We will remind the American people of how good and how great they really are. And in so doing, we will ensure our inner strength for generations to come. Those words spoken by none other than President Ronald Reagan. Thank you to our friends over at Cat TV, our producer Mike Cutler, and all of you for watching. Keep learning, keep listening, and most of all, keep participating. I'm Matt Harrington, and this is the Chamber Telecast.